Hi, I'm Barbara. Welcome to Bee's Kitchen and Garden, where I share with you successful recipes and gardening tips. Today's recipe is for a savory butternut squash soup. The butternut squash is extremely nutritious with antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. So let's get started on our savory butternut squash soup. For our savory butternut squash soup, we have wonderful ingredients to give us that excellent flavor. You'll need a butternut squash, onions, butter, carrots, light cream, olive oil, spices, maple syrup, apple cider vinegar, and chicken broth. Get your ingredients together and here we go. To begin, quarter your onions. These onions are from my garden, and this year we had a drought. So these are not really medium to big onions, and therefore I'm going to use this one, which is sort of a medium size, and then these two, these two, which are smaller, because that's the way they grew this year. If you don't have a lot of rain, there's several of your veggies that will turn out smaller than normal because they need that water. So this one I'm just going to cut in half, and there we go. Leave room for your squash. Now add carrots, about a half a pound of carrots. I've cut my bag open. This is a pound bag, so half of this bag would be about half a pound. Okay, maybe take a few more. There we go. Now, be prepared to cut your butternut squash in half lengthwise. These have a very thick skin. Be extremely careful. When you cut it, just take your time and work on the squash. It needs to be cut all the way in half lengthwise. It has a very tough skin, very similar to pumpkin. What you don't want to do is grab it like this and push down, and then your hand slides into the blade. Be very careful how your hands are placed. I have cut myself that way before. Okay, so we're cutting our butternut squash in half lengthwise. Now that the squash is cut in half, we're going to scoop out the seeds in the bottom before we put it in the oven. So you'll have two halves that look like this. And you're going to place them on the baking sheet with your other veggies. Now I have my two halves of butternut squash where I've thrown out the seeds and all the other veggies around it, the carrots and the onions. So I'm going to take, again, wash your hands. As you know from watching my videos, I use my hands a lot. What you're going to do is rub a little olive oil on the butternut squash and then drip a bit on the other veggies. Sort of pat a little coating on them so everybody gets a little bit of olive oil. Perfect. And the ones up here, very good. Okay. So everybody's got a little bit of shiny olive oil. Now put your pan in the oven, preheated to 400 degrees for about 1 hour until the squash is soft when you insert a fork into it. I forgot to mention, before you put it in the oven, take 1 teaspoon of salt and sprinkle it over everything just for a little bit of added flavor. Now put it in the oven. The veggies roasted for an hour, and then I set them aside to cool because we need to get the meat out of the squash, and it was very hot when it came out of the oven. So now the next process. Take your 4 tablespoons of butter and melt them in your soup pot. Then we're going to add some of the spices. so that the butter and the spices can work together and start with our special savory flavorings. The butter is melting, and I'm going to add thyme and rosemary. 1 tablespoon and a half, that's my big spoon, of each. This is the thyme. It's going to add great flavor to the butter before we add the rest of the ingredients. And this is the rosemary. Again, into the butter to give it a little bit of flavor before we add the rest. So we'll stir that and let that simmer for just a little bit. The butter has been simmering on low with the thyme and rosemary. So now we add the vegetables. First, we've got these wonderful onions and carrots. So those go in the pot. And then we're going to scoop out the squash and keep the skin out, but scoop all of the meat of the squash into our pot. The best way to do that is to cut along the sides so that we're sure we don't get the skin in as we start scooping. And then take a spoon and scoop away. Beautiful, buttery, nutty butternut squash. I turned off my heat while I was adding the meat of the butternut squash, and as you can see, this is the second half and it's all cleaned out and in the pot. So next is our chicken broth. One of these packages or one of these cartons is 4 cups and we need 6 cups. So I'm adding the whole one, and this will give us wonderful flavor and consistency that we need. So there we go. 4 cups, and then 2 more for 6 cups of chicken broth. After all your squash meat is in, stir and start to get everything mixed up. Now we are going to add some of that wonderful savory flavor. We have 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. And to counterbalance this taste, 2 tablespoons, 1, 2. To counterbalance this taste, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of wonderful maple syrup. 1, 2. Stir, and you can turn your heat on low while we add the rest. After adding the pure maple syrup and the apple cider vinegar, add your salt and pepper, stir well, cover, and simmer for 1 hour on a low heat. So now for the last couple of steps. This has been simmering for 1 hour. Then I let it cool for another 45 minutes to 1 hour so that I can touch the pan without getting burned, which makes me feel very good about keeping my blender glass in good shape. I don't like pouring hot liquids into glass containers unless I'm positive they can handle it. So what we're going to do is take a ladle and mix this up and blend it to make a wonderful soup. So ladle it in. I like to fill my blender only about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way full, because as you probably know, when you start blending it, it pops up and rises, and I don't want it coming over the edges or under the lid. And of course I drip some there. Well, that gets washed up later. So ladle it into the blender. This is going to make a lot. which can freeze easily. The first batch is in the blender, so I'm going to mix it. And I'm going to continue mixing it until it's absolutely smooth. That will give us this wonderful butternut squash soup. If you're enjoying this recipe, please check out all of my other recipes. I have a hearty zucchini soup recipe, a creamy zucchini soup recipe, and other types of dishes, a quick 20-minute dinner. Check out my YouTube channel for other recipes. And now let's finish the final few steps for our savory butternut squash soup. Start your mixers. Once your first batch is ready, pour it into a large saucepan, which is where we're going to pour all of our batches, and then warm up our soup. Okay, ready for the second batch. This is my third batch, and it's proving to be a little bit thick. If that happens to you, take a little bit of the chicken broth, maybe about a tablespoon and a half, add it, and then try again. And hopefully that is the right consistency for the blender. I'm simmering the soup on a low heat. You'll notice I have storage containers. This soup freezes well, and although you may feel it takes a while to make the soup, you're going to have it frozen for several meals. When you need it, it will be ready. The last step, take 1 cup of light cream. As you can see, I'm just about at the top of my pan, but it will still take 1 cup of light cream and mix it in with the soup. Our final product, butternut squash soup, creamy, beautiful, ready to eat, and ready to freeze. These are 4.5 cup freezer containers. I'll probably fill 2 and have some left over for a couple of bowls. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your savory butternut squash soup.